Marcus Oxley, you're chair of the Global Network for Disaster Reduction. You're calling for a change in the way aid is delivered to prevent disasters like these. What changes do you believe must be made?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think clearly there's something amiss, isn't there? When I was looking at the statistics coming out of Haiti, and it was something like 75% of the educational facilities, this is in the Port-au-Prince area, were destroyed. 50% of the health facilities were destroyed. 7 major hospitals were destroyed. The very facilities that actually, when a disaster strikes, that you need to survive to provide support to the community. These critical public buildings, the majority of these buildings collapsed. Now, the majority of these public buildings, this type of infrastructure is exactly the type of infrastructure that international aid is used to build. So the international aid community tends to support building things like hospital facilities, building things like educational facilities. That's the type of... And clearly now we're seeing that aid, not only has it been a waste of money, it's actually been a death trap for those that it's actually meant to be providing the services for. So there's something very much awry, there's something amiss with the way that our aid system is working, the way that our provision of these basic services through to low-income countries is happening. And so that's what I'm arguing. There has to be a change in the way that system is working, because it's not actually meeting the needs of the people who are most at risk from that. And yet we're hearing from Margrethe, from Bruno, that relatively small changes to the way that this is provided. So we're talking perhaps 5–10% in terms of the capital cost of these types of public facilities, can make these buildings in a way that they are resistant to earthquakes or cyclones or floods, whatever the particular types of hazards are that are affecting these countries. So if I am a taxpayer in a country that is providing support to development support to a low-income country, I'm feeling that my government is wasting my taxpayers' money, because actually the facilities that they're providing are not actually doing the job that I am a taxpayer am contributing towards. But how does a system, when this does happen, where do we ask the hard questions of the system? Where's the accountability within the system for this? Does that reside with the national governments for allowing this type of construction to happen on their territories? Is it the international community who provided the support to the national governments to do this? Somewhere along the way in our own societies, if there was poor construction, malpractices, there would be some way that we would have accountability, some procedures, some internal systems that provide checks and balances against some of the bad practices that clearly we're seeing. And so I think, if we are to provide aid, not only do we have to provide it in a way that we're building these buildings in a way that is resilient, but that we're thinking through seriously about what are the procedures that provide some of that accountability, that make that aid actually appropriate to the needs and priorities of the people that it's meant to be supporting. And what are the mechanisms to do that? Now, that's incredibly challenging.
So you're suggesting here that governments that give aid should be called to account for the way that aid is spent and the quality of the construction that is put up in their name. Do you have any idea how to do that?
Well, I mean, again, if we go into the realities of providing support in these countries, it's often the case that the construction codes actually are legislated in a way that the buildings should be built in that way. The problem comes that even if we've got the codes and the legislations, it doesn't actually guarantee that it's translated into good practice on the ground. And I think the international community has a responsibility both to the recipient country that is receiving this support, and also to the donor constituencies whose tax money is being used to provide this support, to make sure that the assistance that they do give actually is sustainable, is lasting, and it is appropriate to the environment that it's actually constructed in. So,
and you also want the people who suffered most in this quake, I think in particular about Haiti at the moment, those people to be empowered to help with the rebuilding of their own towns. And you want them to be able to call governments to account for the rebuilding. How could that be done?
Well, there's a couple of things there. One of the experiences that we've learnt in other earthquake-affected regions, where it's a similar type of construction, where perhaps the legislation is there, but the legislation is not enforced. One of the things that has been found that if local people have a greater awareness and understanding as to what actually good practice is, and local property owners are aware of these things, that it's much more likely that these buildings are built in a way actually that does comply with the codes. So it's very much it's creating that level of understanding and of awareness by the end users, because ultimately it's the end users who have to live and reside in these properties, that have to use these facilities. And so there are ways of creating that level of awareness and understanding at the at the grassroots level, at the local level, which can help create a bit of accountability and a bit of transparency in the way that this is provided. There are also other ways that we can, that civil society organisations, that community-based groups can actually monitor themselves and actually provide an independent overview of whether or not we are complying with the various principles and standards and recommendations that are needed to build resilience. So we have ways to do that, and we've started to. In fact, this very conference here this week has been discussing issues about how we can work together better as a group of practitioners on the ground, as a group of civil society organisations, how we can forge partnerships with local governments, with local communities, whereby together we can actually take ownership of this issue. And it's only by collectively taking ownership of this issue are we best able to build back better, build back safer in a way that clearly Haiti demonstrates needs to be done.
Thank you. Are there any final thoughts on this that you'd like to add, any of our panel?
A reflection here, because if you look at the really big picture, rich countries are safer than poor countries for their citizens. So there is a fundamental underpinning here of that poverty in itself is a risk. Yeah. There's all the other driving forces of political leadership and will and education. But even highly disaster-prone countries like Japan, which is arguably the most disaster-prone in the world, is these days a very safe country because it's wealthy, but also because an enormous persistence ever since, in fact, the Tokyo earthquake in 1923 to build a safer society. So economic development and time are probably the most determining factors to allow that persistence and the focus that will really make a difference for Haiti and many other countries today that are on our risk map.
Thank you.